Hey, how are you doing? Well, I just thought, with all of the, what I see as a lot of talk about the moon and partial eclipses and all that kind of stuff, I see on YouTube that you can now look at some of the talk from some of the astronauts that actually went to the moon. Well, I know that even that is under what shall we say? It's controversial, isn't it? That some people think that they never did go to the moon. But let's assume that they did. This is a book. I'm actually reading a book now. Now I should say that I'm going back to reading it because it's by a couple of guys, Christopher Knight and Alan Butler. Christopher Knight was the author of the best-selling The Hiram Key, which I haven't been able to find, so I haven't read that, or Civilization 1, which was written by Alan Butler. But they've written this book now called Who Built the Moon? And I know that sounds, it sounds incredibly unlikely, doesn't it? But when they say what life on Earth would be like if we didn't have the moon, then it starts to make it seem like it may have been actually built. Now, I'll have to look pretty closely because it's very, very small type, but on the back of the book, Who Built the Moon, there's all kinds of notes, and they tease you into the idea is to get you to read the book, obviously, and the questions that they're trying to answer within the book, if I could just read those, said, could it be that the moon is artificial? Could it even be hollow? A seeming impossibility for a natural planetary object. And the idea is that they're saying in this that it may not be a natural object. So it says, extraordinary claims indeed, but keep an open mind and read the compelling arguments based on scientific evidence and irrefutable logic. So here's some of the questions that they're asking. Why does the moon have little or no heavy metals? Now, we've been to the moon and we brought back lots of rocks. In fact, while one astronaut was going around keeping the command module in flight, ready to pick up the landing astronauts, those actually on the moon were picking up rock samples and putting them in boxes and stuff like that, ready to bring back. And these objects, these samples of the moon, have been given to various universities and scientific bodies to do their investigations. So it says, so why does it have little or no heavy metals? That they haven't found any heavy metals. And apparently it doesn't have any core. Now this is an interesting thing, and it will be just denied by anybody who hasn't read any of this, but NASA confirmed that when one of the space capsules, not capsules, but they had to eject and leave on the moon one of the spacecrafts, and when it hit the moon, it sounded like a bell. It rang like a bell, and it could only do this if it was hollow. Now, Carl Sagan, or Sagan, depending on where you come from, Carl Sagan was the great astronomical scientist of the, I think he's dead now, but Carl Sagan was very important in research in space, and he said that as the moon is a satellite which is orbiting the Earth, it could not be a satellite. First of all, it's too big for us to have it as a satellite. It's too big. It revolves around, it orbits around the Earth in a particularly strange orbit, because it always has the same face to the Earth. So it in itself does not revolve as it revolves. It always stays the same to us, and that's very strange. Now, if it rang like a bell, then there would be another aspect to that, which they talk about in the book, that in fact it could be made of metal. This is beginning to sound like the Star Wars, isn't it? And the Death Star, if you remember. But here's an interesting thing. It says Neil Cummins, Professor of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Maine, has written about the consequences if the moon did not exist. So let's assume, if we assume for the moment that it is a produced product of some kind, that it was constructed, like as in who built the moon. If it was built. Now, if it hadn't been built, this is how important the moon is to us, has written about the consequences of the moon if it did not exist. He said he explains that the moon would be the Earth would be turning so fast that one day would take only 8 hours, and complex life would not exist yet. Now, if higher life forms did eventually manage to evolve, such creatures would be very different to us, without example, any communication through speech. One thing is certain: no moon would mean no humans. Now, the other thing about the moon and the effect that it has, everybody knows that it affects people in different ways. In among all of the Dracula, all of that that kind of folklore is all tied up with the moon and the effect that it has on us when it becomes full. I've often heard people who know nothing about astronomy, as I do, as I don't, and they say, yeah, well, she's acting a bit crazy, or he's acting a bit crazy. Well, it is a full moon, so almost everybody knows that the moon is a great influence on us, and they don't think so much perhaps as to what the effect it would be on the Earth, as the planet Earth. And apparently without the moon, there could have, which slows down lots of things like tides. Tides are regulated by the moon, which the orbit of the moon goes, it produces a kind of a bulge in the tides, and the force of gravity will make the water, the seawater, actually grind on the bottom, which produces friction, which then in turn produces a slower moving Earth. And it's all in this book, and it is an incredibly interesting book. It's not as fanciful as you might think. There's a lot of mathematical data, which of course is a little bit hard going, but it is just so interesting to think that these strange things are happening, including the fact that we went at enormous cost and resources and ingenuity. We went to the moon, and now we haven't been back. Since the last visit, we haven't been back. Now, why have we not been back? Why is it that the moon revolves? Now this is very interesting, even if you're not a mathematician, which certainly I am not. It says, why is it that the moon revolves at exactly 1/100th of the speed that the Earth turns on its axis? And why is it the moon is exactly 400 times smaller than the sun, and precisely 400 times closer to the Earth? Now, if you can just hold your hand up to something and see that by the distance, if I hold my hand closer to my face, it doesn't cover my face. If I hold my hand closer to the camera, which is what I'm doing now, of course, then the ratio between the camera and me is very important when the hand is introduced. So the hand is like the moon, and the moon is so precisely spaced between the sun and the planet Earth that it can have a perfect eclipse. So when we do have an eclipse, because of the mathematics that are involved, it's a perfect eclipse. And there are other reasons as well. And why is the moon exactly 400 times smaller than the sun? Why do we find a consistent and beautiful sequence of, let me see, integer numbers, which when looking at every major aspect of the moon, whereas no pattern emerges for any other planet or moon in the solar system? In other words, all of these figures that they're quoting are 400 times smaller than the sun, 400 times, all of these figures keep cropping up, and especially if you're good at math, you will see more in that information than certainly I am able to see, but I can take a certain amount on trust, and the picture of what the moon is to us as humans starts to become very compelling. If it's too big to be our satellite, and it's hollow, which almost by definition of what a satellite is, it has to be solid, and yet it seems to be provable that it's not solid. So, you know, if you're up for it, I would recommend that this book is on your reading list. I'm going to read it again, so I'm a little bit, I just picked it up on a whim from the shelf, and felt the need to talk about it. I hope you'll read this book. It's actually very interesting, very absorbing, and it's called Who Built the Moon? I hope you'll enjoy it. Take care.